But now on Daf Yud Gimel Amid Beitz, halacha is that Truma Gedola has to be given min goren. Goren are the stacks, the aremos, we call it, of garine tfua, after you took off the moats. Umina yekev. Yekev is that underground cistern where the yayin goes down after they do the dricha, the pressing of the grapes. In other words, you have to be mafresh truma, whether it's from tvua, from peros, after gemar kol malachton. It's kach trumas ma'aser, and he tell us element agorim in a yekev, as we saw in the words of Rava, that the Levi, when he took ma'aser rishon before afrosh's truma, he has to be mesaken the trumas ma'aser before he gives it to the kohen. Now the Gemara asks another kasha on the answer that our Mishnah is talking about Maser Rishon Shlo Hifrishu Bimenu Trumas Mas. According to what we understood originally, the Mishnah is talking about Tevel because they were not yet Mafresh Truma. And now we're talking about Afrosh's Truma Gedola. We understand what the word machashev means. In the Mishnah, it says machashev means he has to calculate exactly how much he has in order to figure out how much truma gedola he wants to give. And that's called omed, aleph, vav, mem, dalet. Omed means when you make it as an estimation. And whatever it seems that in his estimation he has to give to truma, that's fine. Of course, midaraisa, there's no share of truma chitachas poter sakri. But if the Mishnah now is talking about Ma'aser Rishon, then mechashev. How can the Mishnah say mechashev, which means omed? He just makes he looks with his eyes and he tries to evaluate how much he has to give. Hamedida boy, he has to know exactly how much zera is there in order to be mafresh, exactly what the Torah requires him to be mafresh. And the shear of maser, in the case of Trumas maser, is 10% of the maser. So he got 10%, and now he has to take off 10% for the Kohen. He has to know exactly if he's giving 10%. How can he just be machasher? So the Gemara answers, Hamani, this must reflect the sheet of Abba Elazar ben Gimel, and he holds that Afrosh's Trumas Maser does not need medida. You don't have to actually measure it. Tisanya, we learned in the Brisa, Abba Eliezer ben Gimel Omer Nechshav Lachem Trumaschem. And the Torah in this pasuk is telling us that Trumas Maser, that the Levi is mafresh for the Kohen, has the same din as Dagon when the Israel is mafresh Truma from Goren. The Torah is creating an analogy here between two categories of trumos. Achas, truma gedola, the achas, trumas maser. So therefore, when the pasuk says v'nechshav lachem trumaschem in the plural, that halacha v'nechshav applies equally to both truma gedola and trumas maser by virtue of the hekesh between truma gedola and Trumas Maser. The shame should Truma Gedoli tells Ba'omed. Ubemachshava kach Trumas Maser niteles Ba'omed ubemachshava. He doesn't have to be medagdik in the cheer of Truma. He can be mafresh Trumas Maser Ba'omed, just like the Yisrael himself is mafresh Truma Gedola Ba'omed. What does the word b'machshava mean here? He says, "Kidei lahatir kol tvua b'achila ain't sarach likro b'fiv." He doesn't have to verbally announce this is truma. He can just do the afrasha, and in his mind, in his machshava, he decides that that segment is for truma, and that's going to be matir, the balance of his tvua. Gufa. Let's go back to Rav Shimon Lakish that we mentioned earlier. The very fact that the Levi took Maser and now there's a chalos maser, then even though it's shibolim, and it was lo nigmar malachta, nevertheless, he's chayav to be mafresh truma from the maser because of the shem maser. My timer, what's the logic behind this? Amar Rava hoil v'yotzal of shem maser. So in my Hebrew version, he has the following comment. The Torah says, I believe it's Parshas Shlach. In any event, in Bamidbar Yudches, it says, Ki tikhu me'es b'nei Yisrael's maser, v'arei mosa mimenu tshuvas Hashem maser min ha'maser. So it says min ha'maser. And Rava interprets that min ha'maser means it already is called maser. And once it's called maser, then the Torah says, ve'harei mosa mimenu maser min ha'maser. I mean, the truma is chal because it's called maser, even though there was no gemara malach. Rav Shimon ben Lakish maser rishon shekdimo b'shibolim. And now what happens is the 10% for the Levi was already separated, but it hadn't yet reached the hand of the Levi. It was before. It was notel netilas halev. Potter mitruma gedola. The Levi does not have to give truma gedola, and that's really interesting. Why? Because that 10%, in the case of ikdimo b'shibolim, was never hufrash mimenu truma gedola. So in Yiddish we say was likt. You know, what's inherent in the Tvua is Truma Gedola. And Reish Lakish is saying, no. The Levi is only chayav in Trumas Maser. He's not chayav in Truma Gedola. So he'll give 10%, not 12%. Shenemar, from whence does Reish Lakish derive this chiddush? The pasuk says in Trumas Maser, the pasuk that we read before, Ki sekhu me'es b'nei Yisrael es ha'maser, v'arei mosa mimenu trumas Hashem maser min ha'maser. And the Torah is saying that the Levi is commanded in maser min ha'maser, 1/10 of the 1/10. I'm sorry, 10% of the 10% that he received from the Yisrael. Maser min ha'maser amarti l'cha. V'lo truma gedola u'trumas maser min ha'maser. Torah says that the Levi is only chayiv. It maxes out with one chi of truma, which is maser min ha'maser, but he's not chayiv in an additional truma, meaning truma gedola. Amalei Rav Papa Abaye. Abaye asks, Rav Papa asks Abaye the following question. Once we derive from this pasuk that the Levi is not chayiv in truma gedola from the Maser Rishon, ihachi afilu mikdimo b'kri nami. Why do you limit your case to ikdimo b'shibolim when it was still in its real natural state? What happens after the entire process of winnowing and they stacked it up in a stack that's called kri? And there was no afrashis, trumas, and masros yet. And now the Levi comes and he takes maser. Nami, even in this case, the Levi should be parted from truma gedola because the Torah says maser min ha'maser v'lo truma gedola v'gam trumas maser min ha'maser. Why doesn't that apply? Even in the case of Kri, of Ikdimo B'Kri, why does Reish Lakish say it's Ikdimo B'Shibolim, implying that if it was Ikdimo B'Kri, the Levi is chayiv not only in Trumas Maser, but he's also chayiv in Truma Gedola? Why is that so? Abai responds to Papa. Alecha, my krad is to answer your question. The Torah says, again, back in the same pasuk, Mikol matnosechem tarimu es kol trumas Hashem. That the Levi has to be mafresh from these matanos. It says matnosechem. And what's matnosechem with regard to the Levi? It's got to be Maser Rishon. And it says, Tarimu es kol trumas Hashem. Why the extra word kol? And the answer is that the Levi has to be mafresh from Maser all truma, kol trumas Hashem. Whether it's trumas Maser or truma gedola. Now wait a second. The pasuk, we now have a contradiction between two psukim. One pasuk says, "Maser mina maser amarti lecha v'lo truma gedola mina maser mina maser." The other pasuk says, "Mikol matnosechem tarim es kol trumas Hashem, even truma gedola." So I don't know how to go with this. Which is it? Why does Reish Lakish make the following call, the following distinction? If it's Hikdimo Bishibolim, then the Levi is not chayav in Truma Gedola. If it was Hikdimo Bikri, then the Levi is chayav. So that's what the Gemara clarifies. Ma rois. Well, why do you go in that direction? And Abai answers, hi. In the case of Hikdimo Bikri, Idgan. The very moment that the Meruach process culminated in Kri, at that moment, the Chiyuv Trumas of Maisros emerges, the Shem Tevel, and that's called Idgan. And therefore, that Tfuah as a Chefza is obligated in Truma Gedola. The fact that the Levi takes it doesn't mean he can remove that Truma Gedola that's inherent in the Tfuah because it's Gancha after Kri. But in the case of Hikdimo B'Shibalim, there was never a Chiyuv Trumas of Maisros because it was before Gemar Malacha, Lo Idgan. It's not called Dagan. So if there was never a Chiyuv Trumas of Maisros, then when the Levi takes his Maser, then he's not Chayiv in Truma Gedola. Tonight also we learned in the Mishnah in Masos Perek Dalet, Hamakalef Siorin, if he strips the barley grains of their shibolim and he wants to eat them as is, Mekalef achas v'ochel, he's not chayvin maser. Why? Because he's eating on achilas aroy, achas. So we're talking about siorim, about barley. V'lo nismarchu adayin, there was not, it's before Meiruach, before winnowing. And there's no Kri, obviously, there's no Gmar Malacha. It's therefore he's allowed to eat, as we said at the beginning of our discussion today, Achilas Haroy. That's called Achas V'yoch. V'im Kilef V'nosan L'toch Yad. But at first he peels off all the outer shafts of the Siorim, and then he puts the Siorim, which have been stripped of their outer stalks, and he puts them in his hand, is chayah. Why? Because now if he eats from his hand, that's already considered achilas keva. By the way, you see something fantastic from this Gemara, which has a lot of relevance to sukkah and other dinim, that the difference between achilas haroy and achilas keva is not in volume. It's the same exact volume, but it's in the tzuras hachila. If he eats them one by one, before he takes off, he takes off the shemam from the second one, he's already eating the first one. That's a different echus. It's a different quality of eating. That's called achilas haroy. But if he gathers all of them together in his hand and then starts popping one after the other in his mouth, that's already considered achilas keva, which is prohibited even before Gmar Malacha. Omar Abulazar, v'chein linyan Shabbos. We're about to embark upon a very fascinating sugya, and we're going to try to fit it in. We don't have that much time, but how do you compare two concepts? One is called Gmar Malacha, which is that's a concept in Trumas and Maisros. It generates a two, Meleches Dash. What Dash means when you actually you smash the kernels to remove the outer chaff, and that's a malacha d'oraisa on Shabbos. Says Rabbi Loza v'chein linyan Shabbos that if he peels off manually the outer klipa of these siorim, if he takes one at a time and eats them, he's not chayiv on Shabbos. That's not disha. But if he gathers them all together, that's a normal disha. It's called Gemar Malacha and he's chayiv Trumas and Meisers, and it's called disha and he's chayiv on Shabbos. Kumar says, Aini, could that really be so? For Rav Makalfale Debese Kasi Kasi, Rav Chia Makalfale Debese Kasi Kasi. Now, Rav would not let his Rebbitzin do something which was prohibited on Shabbos with a malacha, and yet she would remove with her hands the klipa of the siorim and fill up many, many kosos. And that's the same true for Rabbi Chia's Rebbitzin, which would be by marriage Rav's niece, Rebbe's niece. Rav and Rabbi Chia. Sorry, not Rebbe and Rabbi Chia. Anyway, you see clearly that you're allowed to be kolef on Shabbos, even though he's gathering it together or she's gathering it together in a kos. Ella says the Gemara Itmar, that quote of Rabbi Eliezer with regard to the Mishnah Seifa Itmar. When Rabbi Eliezer equated it to Shabbos, he's referring to the Seifa. Let's read the Seifa, the Mishnah Molel Melilos Shel Chitin. When a person is mafarek chitin rakos, he rubs them together with the palms of his hands, menapeach, and he sort of blows them a little bit, v'yochel, and he can eat them. So he blows away the chaff, and that's called an achilas haroy. V'imnipach v'nosan l'toch cheko. However, if he gathers it in a cloth, which is called shulei abgadim, chayav. It means that now when he eats one after the other from cheko, from where he collected it in this garment, that's called an achilas keva. And therefore, he's not allowed to eat achilas keva. On that seifa, we have the comment of Rebbe Loza, v'chein l'Shabbos. If somebody has chitim, if he did a melila before Shabbos, and on Shabbos he's allowed to blow away the chaff. But he's not allowed to put them into his cheko, into shulei begadim, for the purpose of another suda. Even if he's actually separating it biyad, but nevertheless, that's already prohibited. Askif le Rabbi Abba Bar Mamel. Wait a second. You're telling me that Rabbi Loza made his comment only on the Seifa, Veresha. And as far as the distinction that the Reisha of the Mishnah made between Makalef Siorim Achas, the Ochel, or Makalef Umeniach Biyodo, that's Linyan Maser, in it's only relevant to the Chiv Maser. But Linyan Shabbos Lo, that's the way you want to tell me. Umika Midi to Linyan Shabbos Lo Avi Gmar Malacha, Linyan Maser Avi Gmar Malacha? Are you telling me that as far as Shabbos, this is not called Gmar Malacha? And he's not chayiv for the malach, but as far as Meiser is concerned, it's considered Gemar Malacha. So if it's clear in the Mishnah that once you put the garinim into your hand after the kiluf, that's considered Gemar Malacha. And for sure, says the Gemara, you'd be chayiv linyan Shabbos if you're makali for nosin l'tok yodo. It's Malecha's dash. That's the Gemara's kasha in the name of Rabbi Abba Bar Mam. Maskif lo Rav Sheshes, breder of Idi. And now you have a kasha on a kasha. Rav Sheshes is going to ask a kasha on Rabbi Abba's Lamaksha. He says, Velo, are you telling me that there's an absolute assumption that if it's not a Malacha Linyan Shabbos, it cannot be a Gvar Malacha Linyan Maser? That's not true. I'll give you a whole list of cases where it's considered Gmar Malacha L'Chiyuv Maser, but it's not Gmar Malacha L'Shabbos. For Garnon L'Maser, there are many different malachas that are considered Gmar Malacha with regard to being Kovei L'Chiyuv Maser, but you're allowed to do them on Shabbos. This Stan, the Mishnah says at the beginning of Masros, Ezi Garnon L'Maser, when is it considered that he was Kovei a Chiyuv Maser? Ishuim vadluim mishiafaksu. In other words, there's something called a pikas, which is a flower that grows on the top of these vegetables called kishuim and dluim. And the moment that that flower falls off, that's already considered kviyas l'maser and yechayev maser. Shalo piksu. And not only that, even before the flower fell off, Misha Yamid Arema, if he sets them up in a pile, he was Kovei the Chiyuv Maser. I'll give you another case. Also in the first parak of Maser, it's Tanan Nami, another Mishnah Gabi B'Tzolim, Misha Yamid Arema, when he takes a group of onions and he puts one on top of the other, he's Chayim and Maser. So you see that Adama Hamadas Harema is already considered Gmar Malacha as far as Masav Ilagavi Shabbos. Hamadas Harema Potu, which means there's a Malach called Ma'amer, but Ma'amer only applies out in the fields. But here he's in his house. You have no choice but to assume that even if regard to Maser, Hamadas Harema is considered Gmar Malacha, but nevertheless you're allowed to do it on Shabbos. And the difference between Shabbos and Maser is very fundamental. And that is that with regard to Shabbos, Meleches Machshavas Asra Torah, Hachanami Meleches Machshavas Asra Torah, the Torah only prohibited, and if you take a look at Rashi 3 lines before the end of the Amud, Meleches Machshavas Hi Meleches Umnus. It's got to be a very sophisticated professional, the farmers know their profession. But just to pile onions, any balabasta knows how to pile it one on top of the other. But for Shabbos, you're not chayav for kiluf siorim, even though you collected the siorim after the kiluf in your yad, it's still not considered the umnus. It's not a meleches machsheves, and the Torah only prohibits meleches machsheves. So if you would be able to stay for another extra 2-3 minutes, just that we finish the daf, Ketzad Molel, when we were matir Melilas Chitin on Yontiv, because it's a Shinui and Kelachar Yad, and it's not Disha Kedarka, and the Rabbanan, when that goes on Melila and Yontiv, is what exactly is Melila? Abaye Mishmei Rav Yosef Omar Chada Achada. In other words, what he has to do is he has to hold the tvua between his thumb and his pointer finger, and then rub them together. Of Avya Mishmei Rav Yosef Omar Chada Atarte. In other words, he should take the tvua between 2 fingers, hold on to the tvua, and then do the melila with his thumb. Rav Amar Kavan the Mishani, once he does any shinui at all, then it's already mutter. So you don't have to be so specific about it. Afilu chada kulu, even if he would take one finger and rub it across all his fingers, as long as he's doing a melila with his thumb and removing the chaff, nami, that's also considered kelachar yad. And when do we say that blowing is considered kelachar yad and it's mutter even on Shabbos? In other words, he did the melila before Shabbos, but now the motes and the garin are still mixed together. Now he blows them to separate the garin from the motes, and he's allowed to do that by blowing it. Omarav Adbarav, Omarav. And here we turn to Daf Yudalid. Minapeach mikishrei etzba'osav ulamala. In other words, when the garinim are on the top of his fingers, and Kishrei Etzbos are the knuckles, so it's on the top hair, then he could blow it. But if they're not on the top, but rather on the palm of his hand, that's not considered kilachar yad, and that we're not going to allow on Shabbos. Again, he did the Malila on Erev Shabbos. And Machku alav b'marova, when the words of Rav, had wings and they came to Eretz Yisrael, they laughed at it. He said, Kevin the Mishani, once he did this shinui, what difference does it make if he's right? He's not passing it from one hand to the other. He doesn't need another shinui. Afilu b'kula yada, even if the garinim are munachim b'chol yado, nami, he still is allowed to blow it. He's allowed to do the nipuach in one hand, but not in two hands. And biyad achas, even b'kol kocho, he's allowed to use all of his might to do this, and that's mutter, as long as he's doing it in one hand and not in two hands. Okay, then, and now we're up to the Mishnah on Daf Yud Daled, which Mirz Hashem will study tomorrow. Beitza. Thank you. Thank you, Tilman.